Hello. Tish'a B'Av is almost upon us, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. History is full of catastrophic events that befell us Jews on Tish'a B'Av, the 9th of Av. The timing is sometimes accidental and sometimes intentional. The Mishnah says that on that day, the spies Moses sent to scout the Promised Lands brought back a largely negative report which demoralized the Israelites. That both temples were destroyed, that the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome failed when he was killed and the city of Betar was destroyed, and that Jerusalem was razed a year later when the exile began. Since then, many other catastrophes occurred on Tish'a B'Av. In 1095, the Pope began the Crusades. On the way to the land of Israel, the Crusaders slaughtered 30 to 50% of the Jews of Europe. In 1242, 24 cartloads of handwritten Talmuds were burned in Paris. In 1290, the Jews were expelled from England. In 1306, the Jews were expelled from France. In 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain, including my own ancestors. In 1626, the false Messiah Shabtai Tzvi was born. His apostasy dashed the hopes of millions of Jews, 1/3 of the total, and severely disrupted their lives. In 1914, World War I began, the Guns of August. It led to World War II and the death of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. It facilitated the Communist Revolution in Russia, spelling 70 years of darkness for Soviet Jews. And in 1941, the Nazis ordered the final solution, the slaughter of all the Jews under their boots. What should our attitude be towards the perpetrators of all these atrocities, and more generally, towards anyone who has wronged us? There are 5 possible responses. First, retaliate in kind. Do the same unto them, an eye for an eye. Second, hate them, but take no action yet. Bide your time and secretly prepare for revenge. Third, forgive them. Fourth, love them. Fifth, ignore them. Let's examine them one by one. First, retaliation. 3 times in the Torah, it appears we are told to retaliate in kind. Ayin tahat ayin, shen tahat shen. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. In Exodus, you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. In Leviticus, a fracture for a fracture, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Just as he inflicted an injury upon a person, so it shall be given to him. And in Deuteronomy, and you shall have no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Anti-Semites talk about our cruelty, our lack of compassion, our lust for revenge, allegedly embodied in that law. There's only one problem with this criticism. There is no record of Judaism ever sanctioning doing any of this. The oral law says that this injunction refers only to financial compensation. Its purpose is to set a limit to it. Do not ask for more than the value of an eye for the loss of an eye. The penalty must be proportional to the offense, not higher than the offense. The Mishnah says, quote, one who injures another becomes liable for 5 things: damages, pain, medical expenses, incapacitation, and mental anguish. Damages. If he put out his eye, cut off his arm, or broke his leg, the injured person is considered as if he were a slave being sold in the marketplace, and one must calculate how much he was worth before the injury and how much he is worth after the injury, and the differences are the damages to be paid. Pain. One must calculate how much a man of equal standing would require to be paid to undergo such pain. Medical expenses. If he has struck another, he is under obligation to pay medical expenses. If the wound was healed but reopened, healed again but reopened, he would still be under obligation to heal him. However, if the wound had completely healed, even though it may have reopened much later, he would no longer be under obligation to heal him. Incapacitation. The wages lost during the period of illness must be reimbursed. Mental anguish. must be calculated in accordance with the status of the offender and the offended." Unquote. The Gemara that followed the Mishnah explains, with arguments that are quite clever. Here they are. It says in Leviticus, "He who kills a beast shall make it good, beast for beast." All agree that beast for beast means monetary compensation. So it is for eye for eye. It says in Numbers, "You shall not take monetary compensation from a murderer. He must be put to death." This implies that it is only from a murderer that you may not take compensation, whereas you may take compensation for other offenses, such as loss of body parts. It says in Leviticus, "You shall have only one standard of law for you, for your countrymen, and for the stranger." Therefore, an eye for an eye cannot mean actual retaliation, because if the eye of one was big and the eye of another was small, one weak and one strong, they would not be equivalent, and two standards of law would apply. So monetary compensation is implied. Money is the great equalizer. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, "If eye for eye meant retaliation, what would you do if a blind man put out the eye of another man? Or if a person missing both hands cut off the hand of another? Or if a person missing both legs broke the leg of another? You could not physically retaliate in kind, yet the law must be applied the same way to all. So it means monetary compensation." The school of Rabbi Ishmael taught, the Torah says in Leviticus, "Just as he inflicted injury upon a person, so it shall be given to him." The word "given" can apply only to monetary compensation. The school of Rabbi Hia taught, the Torah says in Deuteronomy, "hand for hands," meaning something that is given from hand to hand, that is, money. Abaye said in the name of the school of Hezekiah, it says in Exodus, "Life for life, eye for eye." It does not say life and eye for eye. If one retaliated in kind, the offender may die while being blinded. This would be unfair and cannot be predicted or prevented, so monetary compensation is meant. Rabbi Zebid said in the name of Rabbah, it says in Exodus, "wound for wound." If retaliation were meant, a person who is delicate would suffer more pain than a person who is not delicate. This would be unfair, so monetary compensation is meant. Rav Papa said in the name of Rabbah, it says in Exodus, "If men quarrel and one strikes the other and forces him to stay in bed, then the offender shall pay for the loss of his victim's time and shall pay for him to be thoroughly healed." This refers explicitly to monetary compensation. Besides, flesh heals fast for some people but not for others, so retaliation would be unfair, and monetary compensation is meant. Rav Ashi said, it says in Exodus, "If one man's ox kills another man's ox, he shall surely pay ox for ox." The word "for" in "he shall pay ox for ox" is the same as in eye for eye, namely tahat. So just as in the first monetary compensation is implied, he shall pay, so it is in the second. As a final note, it must be stressed that the primary aim of Jewish justice is not so much punishment of the guilty, but restoration of the victim. Putting out the eye of the offender does not help the victim one bit, but financial compensation does. In the case of murder, however, no restoration of the victim is possible, so a different resolution is necessary. The second possible response to being wronged is hatred. Hatred and bearing grudges are not Jewish. Jews could not have contributed to the betterment of humankind as they did if they wasted time hating all those who have wronged them. As is well known, hatred eventually destroys the haters. The Torah tells us clearly not to hate. Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Do not hate your brother in your heart. The Talmud says, quote, "Why was the first temple destroyed? Because the people engaged in the three main sins, idolatry, sexual immorality, and murder. But why was the second temple destroyed, given that in its time people were occupying themselves with Torah, observance of mitzvot, and deeds of kindness? Because senseless hatred, sinat chinam, prevails." That teaches you that senseless hatred is considered as serious as the three sins of idolatry, sexual immorality, and murder combined. So even though the majority was punctiliously observant, The many groups harbored intense hatred towards one another. This infighting led to Rome's victory and the razing of the temple. So clearly it's not enough to be technically observant. The hatred towards those who think differently must go also. One is reminded of a prayer uttered by a little girl. Dear God, please make the bad people good and the good people nice. In Talmudic days, the school of Hillel was always pitted against the school of Shammai. In the end, the Sanhedrin decided to rule according to Hillel. Why? Because it says Hillel's disciples were kind and humble and always quoted the other side's opinions before their own. Now, if some hatred is senseless, it implies that some hatred must make sense. When? The Talmud answers, you may bear ill will when you witness someone breaking the Torah. You must then intervene quickly before helping those who you love, so that the ill will does not turn to hatred. How do you know that you have reached the point of hatred? A hater, soneh in Hebrew, is someone who does not speak to his fellow for 3 days because of enmity between them. Unquote. Hatred is bad and destroys the haters. The Talmud even proposes a prayer to be delivered from hatred. Quote, may it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, that no hatreds against any person come in our hearts, and no hatred against us come into the hearts of any other person, and may none be jealous of us, and may we not be jealous of anybody, and may your Torah be our labor all the days of our lives, and may our words be as supplications before you. Unquote. The third possible response to being wronged is forgiveness. In Jewish law, the perpetrator must seek forgiveness from the victim, and the victim must forgive. A story in the Talmud illustrates this. Quote, once Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, was coming from Migdal Gedor, from the house of his teacher, and he was riding leisurely on his ass by the riverside and was feeling happy and elated because he had studied much Torah. He came upon an extremely ugly man who greeted him, saying, peace be upon you, sir. The rabbi, however, did not return his greeting, but instead said to him, you worthless person, how ugly you are! Are all the people in your city as ugly as you are? The man replied, I do not know, but go and tell the craftsman who made me how ugly is the vessel that you have made. Rabbi Elazar then realized that he had done wrong. So he came down from the ass and prostrated himself before the man and said to him, I have sinned against you, forgive me. The man replied, I will not forgive you until you go to the craftsman who made me and say to him, how ugly is the vessel that you have made. Rabbi Elazar walked behind him to appease him until he reached his native city. The people of his city came out to greet him, saying to him, peace be upon you, O teacher or master. The man who had been insulted then asked them, whom are you calling my teacher, my master? They replied, the man who is walking behind you. He said, if this man is a teacher, may there not be any more like him in Israel. They asked him, why? He replied, he did such and such to me. They said to him, even so, forgive him, because he is a great Torah scholar. The man replied, for your sakes I will forgive him, but only on condition that he does not act this way in the future. Unquote. The Talmud concludes, our rabbis have taught, a man should always be as gentle as the reed and never unyielding as the cedar in granting forgiveness. And adds that after payments have been made for harm, the perpetrator must seek the victim's forgiveness for the suffering that he caused. Unquote. Why forgive? There are many reasons. The first is self-interest. Forgiveness to one's fellow wins forgiveness from heaven. The Talmud says, quote, he who is merciful, that is forgiving, to others, mercy is shown to him by heaven, while he who is not merciful to others, mercy is not shown to him by heaven. Unquote. So, to earn God's forgiveness, you must become more forgiving yourself. The second is imitating God. The Talmud says, God is merciful, so imitate him by forgiving those who have wronged you. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov echoed these sentiments. Imitate God by being compassionate and forgiving. He will in turn have compassion on you and pardon your offenses. The third reason to forgive is more subtle. If I believe God willed everything that happens to me, and everything God wills is for the good, then this too is for my own good, and I should forgive and maybe even thank the perpetrator. Some commentators went further. One said, if the victim refuses to forgive when the perpetrator has asked for forgiveness 3 times in the presence of others, then the victim is deemed to have sinned. Another said, the victim should pray that God forgive the perpetrator even before the perpetrator asks for forgiveness. This is based on the story in Genesis in which Abraham prays to God to forgive Abimelech. So the Talmud says, whoever is merciful, forgiving, to his fellow man is certainly of the seed of our father Abraham, and whoever is not merciful to his fellow man is certainly not of the seed of our father Abraham. Contemporary Rabbi Jonathan Sacks adds, when we forgive and are worthy of being forgiven, we are no longer prisoners of our pasts. But most importantly, all this assumes the perpetrator admits wrongdoing, repents, and asks for forgiveness. If he doesn't, the victim is not required to forgive. In our history, generally speaking, Christians have asked for forgiveness for the wrong they committed against us, but Muslims have not. The fourth possible reaction to being wronged is to love the perpetrator. Loving one who has wronged you is not a Jewish requirement. Some even classify it as a disease. They call it the Stockholm Syndrome. Sociologists define it as a case in which the victims develop positive feelings towards their captors and sympathy for their causes and goals, and negative feelings towards the police or authorities. The origin of the term is a 1973 event in which hostages in a Stockholm bank robbery defended their captors after being released and refused to testify against them in court. The FBI estimates that 8% of victims suffer from it. Here are some examples. In 1974, Patty Hearst was held hostage by an urban guerrilla group. She publicly renounced her family and the police, proclaimed her sympathy for her captors and their goals, and worked with them to rob banks. In 2001, Yvonne Ridley was captured by the Taliban, and when released, she became a fervent Muslim and denounced the values and lifestyles of the West. The syndrome even appears in fairy tales. In Beauty and the Beast, Beauty ends up falling in love with the Beast who captured her and kept her imprisoned. The Stockholm Syndrome afflicts victims of domestic abuse, child abuse, human trafficking, incest, prisoners of war, political terrorism, cult members, concentration camp prisoners, slaves, prostitutes, etc. Women are prone to it more than men. Studies show it even exists among animals. Psychoanalysts believe it is just a survival mechanism. Victims are afraid the perpetrators will perceive their love as fake, so they end up deceiving themselves, believing their positive feelings are genuine. Sadly, the Stockholm Syndrome even causes Jewish self-hatreds. Marginal or ignorant Jews accept the anti-Semitic feelings of the majority and join them in attacking Jews, Judaism, and the State of Israel. The last possible reaction to being wronged is to ignore the perpetrator and move on. This is by and large the Israeli response. They let their government and military deal with terrorism, but as individuals, they ignore terrorists and go on with their lives. They waste no time hating them or plotting retaliation. They waste no time wondering whether to forgive them. They leave that to the far left. This is by far the best Jewish response. Let us conclude with the traditional words, may this be the last Tish'a B'Av we spend in mourning.